being recorded. Our topic today from Dallas was 10 gig to the learning space. And what I'd like to start with, since we're not sure who all is participating, if you don't mind, please introduce yourself and your district or your institution and let us know what you do, and then we'll pop into the discussion. So I'm going to ask you to unmute individually.
Melinda, I'll go ahead and start. I'm Casey Russell. I'm a network engineer here for CanRen. I've been with CanRen this time for about 6 years. I've actually worked here twice. Dallas is from USD 250 in Pittsburgh. That's actually where I started my career in technology ages ago, as did our executive director, Court Buffington, who's here in the room with me. So it's good to see some familiar faces, a familiar institution kind of leading this charge and bringing up. We do like these conversations that grow out of the membership. So if you have an idea for a topic, webinar, or discussion that you would like to see, don't be afraid to bring those to us. We're happy to host them and promote them like we did this one. We love doing that kind of thing to get our members talking to one another. That's part of the value of the consortium. So in order for us to maybe have some order in how we do introductions, why don't I just, I'll name you here, and as we go down the list, rather than have everybody try to go at once. Dallas, why don't you go, and then the others from your institution.
Okay, great. Thanks, Casey. And big shoes to fill there. Thank you for the introduction on that. Dallas Cranker, Network Administrator for Pittsburgh Schools. I've been here about 14 years, I think now. I've lost track, but just presenting this today, and hopefully we get some communication back on it and get a little bit of a direction. So thank you for all joining here.
I'm Brian Spicer. I am the assistant network admin. I have been with USD 250 for coming up on 5 years actually now. So.
All right, and then I see Tyler Palmer just joined. Tyler, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Tyler Palmer with Lawrence Memorial Hospital. Sounded like an interesting topic, so I thought it'd be a fly on the wall.
Okay. All right. The next one in my list, I apologize, I don't recognize the initials here. In my Zoom window, it identifies you as CFICHTL.
Yeah, this is Clark Fickle from May School District. I'm just listening in as well.
All right, perfect, thank you. I see Noah Grothier is here. He's also with USD 250, is that correct?
In the chat, it says hello, yes. So I don't think he has a mic. Sorry about that.
Right, that's okay. And I also see, it looks like Patrick Clear has identified himself over there in the chat. Thank you, Patrick. I see Dean Grell also identified himself from Ottawa. Austin, would you like to go next?
Yeah, my name is Austin Dinger. I'm the Technology Support Coordinator for Washburn Institute of Technology here in Topeka, Kansas. We deal a lot in the small school districts that are around Kansas, and also going to be reaching out to a lot of school districts in the western Kansas range for some new technology that we're going to be using. So we've been working on that, so I thought it'd be interesting to kind of see the advances that are going to be going into where we're looking to bring technology and learning to.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
I see in the chat Doug McDowell from Colby Community College identified himself. Thank you, Doug. How about Kelly?
Kelly from Concordia Public Schools. Been here for about, I guess I'm in my 7th year, and just kind of wanted to participate and see some newer technologies and, you know, seems like we make a change to get upgraded, and then it's time to do it again. So just kind of seeing what best practices are.
All right. I see Todd and Andy have identified themselves in the chat as well. Thank you, guys. How about Dustin? All right. Not hearing Dustin. Let's move to, let's see, Dean already. Well, we've got Todd, we've got Doug. Looks like John Haverty.
Hello, John Haverty, Washburn University. Been in this, working at Washburn for 20 years. I forwarded over to Austin Dinger, worked closely with him over at Washburn Tech, and knew he has lots of school districts and so forth that need to be able to connect with. So it sounds like an interesting topic. Thank you.
Sure. I'm trying to compare the windows with the chat here. Is there anybody I've missed? All right. With that being finished, then I appreciate you all coming today. I know Dallas's intent here was to talk about topics that you guys face every day and just see if there aren't best practices or common approaches you guys can take, not only to streamline what you do, but also to kind of align yourselves. I know you guys report to some of the same upstream organizations. You take funding from some of the upstream organizations. You get grant funds that are similar. So it makes a lot of sense for you guys to compare notes, see what the other is doing, see what works, and maybe more importantly, see what was tried and didn't work, so that you don't make those same mistakes. So I appreciate you being here, and hopefully you'll get some constructive ideas in this meeting and then over the next few as these ideas get fleshed out. So with that, I will turn it over to Dallas.
Thanks again, Casey. I've got a little slideshow that I put together. It's not much, but I'm going to start with that so that we can at least kind of get on the same page as far as the content here. Let me get that started. Casey, would you let me know? Can you see that all right?
Yes, I can see that just fine.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's my first slide there. I basically threw a bunch of graphics of some equipment that I've been looking at to accomplish this goal of what we're calling, or what I'm calling, 10 gig to the learning space, or 10 gig to the classroom. And it essentially is just extending the 10 gigabit Ethernet speed beyond the core. Already a lot of places we've put out 10 gig backbones to our switches, and that's worked fairly well. We have, I guess I'll briefly dive into the topology, but we have schools across the city of Pittsburgh, and we connect with single mode fiber that we lease, and then we light those links, and those transceivers, these little guys on the left-hand side, one of those on the left-hand side, we'll say, sends a 10 gig connection, basically speeds across the single mode backbone to each one of our switches from our central location here at our technology office. And so that basically, that hub and spoke or wagon wheel design is what we've always had. And Casey, if that's pretty much what was here when you started, right?
Yeah, it looks familiar. Yeah, a lot of what you're talking about here was either there when I was there or replaced very shortly after.
Okay. Well, and you know, the leased fiber is more of one of those things that it's something from a company. We have Cox Communications provide that fiber locally for us. So However your particular building is, or your sites or whatever is wired, I don't think really plays into this necessarily from that standpoint. I want to focus more on, I guess, the internal wiring in a building particularly. So just to make that distinction from the get-go, I'm not talking about WAN links or links between buildings. I'm talking more about extending 10 gig to literally the classroom or learning space. So something we've not really had to do or needed to do, but like I said, I'm looking at equipment and I'm kind of trying to figure out some topology changes, some IP changes, some VLAN changes, all this stuff, and try to kind of catalog all that and figure out what I need to do, what we all need to do, maybe to think about that on maybe a bigger scale. So I'll skip to the next slide. So I'm trying to bring a little humor into this. I haven't done these video calls very much. So this was last weekend. This is our VLANs for something. You know, I scribbled down some stuff and I got some IPs there. I got some VLANs. I got some SSIDs. In effect, you could call these WLANs really. But I just threw that on there because in about 2 days, this will change, okay? That's kind of the way we are looking at our structure right now, because we're always in flux. There's always these changes that are going on, these new devices and all the things that you guys are very familiar with every day force us to restructure our network and you know, in ways that severely impact other segments of the network that we didn't even think about. So that's just kind of a little bit of, that's just my notes and stuff, but it doesn't really mean anything because that's what it kind of really looks like to me on the router and the wireless controller. And I'm sure you guys are familiar with seeing stuff like this. You got VLAN IDs, you got IP addresses, you've got subnet masks, which, you know, break those into networks. And we've got some buildings kind of identified here on the left-hand side. And, you know, all these IP spaces is what I'm talking about for NAT ranges, for public ranges, wireless zones, and how all that breaks down. So essentially, what I wanted to talk about on that particular topic was standardization of maybe figuring out what's typical. And I kind of mentioned, you know, there's a lot of devices that are probably consistent across all of our networks. We've got obviously guest clients. We've got clients that we approve and have full access to things. In our case with K through 12, we got teachers, staff, students, guests, all that kind of stuff. But within those devices, there's categories of like phones and I mean IP phones, or you can also say personal phones, personal devices, all these different things that are funneling in and making us adapt our network. So what I was wanting to talk about was also standardizing the equipment. Maybe we're all buying different stuff, and I have a feeling that is absolutely the case. But maybe we're also buying a lot of the same things, trying to accomplish the same goals. And I don't know a lot about these things. And until I plug something in, sometimes I don't even know if it'll light. For instance, up here on the top right-hand corner, let's see, sorry. Up on our top right-hand corner here, this is a module that we put into one of our bigger switches. It is SFP Plus. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but we'll get into that later. Anyway, those little transceivers right there slide into it, and that's what I was talking about with lighting building links and, you know, going switch to switch. That's those little transceivers. Trying to figure out whether or not that will light is like one of the big challenges sometimes, because there's incompatibility with hardware, compatibility with software, all kinds of things that you have to consider here. So that was one of the reasons I was wanting to look at maybe some standardization of some equipment that we're using, or that we could all look at using and kind of bring us all up to the same page on it. This is an existing core switch that we have at one of our high schools. Right now, it's got a 10 gig backbone to it. It has a bunch of 1 gig clients hanging off of it. So essentially all those blue cables right there go to clients, which is pretty typical, I would say, in a lot of large buildings. You take all of your client connections and you bring them back to one place, put them in the switch, and then you haul it back with a fiber uplink, which you can kind of see that little multi-mode fiber uplink on the top left-hand corner there of the switch. That's the 10 gig uplink. My honest opinion of doing this, it's been great from a configuration standpoint, but from a management standpoint, in my opinion, it's very difficult to manage, because every one of these ports could be an AP. It could be an AP tomorrow. It could be a phone tomorrow. It could be a client tomorrow. So we're making changes to those ports on the fly as we need them. And I was just thinking, you know, why don't we push this port density more to the classroom? You know, like try to get switches more into a classroom where they're actually needed, and potentially label them and tag them before they even leave the classroom. So that in a small classroom, like one of our smaller grade schools, for instance, we would set a little box like this. We could put an AP in there. We could put a printer in there. We could hang clients off of it. And basically the VLANs would be established at that smaller switch level. And then the bigger switch at the core would hold all of the VLANs and then pull them back. So that's something I was looking at. So I'm going to go back all the way to the beginning here, and I'm going to reference an outline that I kind of put together roughly. It was what Melinda had showed. So basically the standardization of typical VLANs. Casey, what do you think? How can we have a organized discussion about what we're doing to distinguish traffic at a building level, and how can we talk about that in an orderly manner here?
Well, there are a number of different ways to approach it. Some might decide they want to build VLANs per building. Some might decide that it makes more sense to build VLANs per service and take that VLAN throughout all the buildings. And some might have a hybrid approach. I guess to answer your question, I think what might be a good idea is to query the group either here in chat or maybe in an email list later. Try to get some feedback about the approaches that people are taking and see if there's one that's dominant. Or you might want to discuss, you know, the benefits, the pros and cons of the primary three that, you know, rise to the top.
Okay.
So yeah, I'll leave that to you, whether you want to ask for input individually here via voice. I see somebody's already volunteered in chat there from Dean. But yeah, I would maybe get some ideas of what other people do and then kind of pull your results together and discuss those, see what.
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea. I think I'm going to go with, let's go ahead and put in chat what kind of your basic structure of VLANs looks like, or basic layout or theory on how they should be used and why. And then I'll read them individually as they come in so that we can kind of get a real quick overview of what's going on. So we got Doug McDowell has 28 VLANs in our small network. So they're split up that way. Dean says hybrid, VLANs per building here in Ottawa. Some district-wide VLANs for building, automation, security, infrastructure, time clocks, and imaging. Okay. And Doug says we have used VLANs by building, however, migrated away from that method and used service-based VLANs. So I'd like to add in there too, as well, if you can see the screen there with my slide, we started that way as well, having a building-wide VLAN. And then for service is what Kelly added as well. So yeah, it is always, it does seem like it's probably a mix for the most part, I would say. User type and security with a guest Wi-Fi. So it could also depend a lot on how you see, you know, your wireless structure now. Of course, that's the main driving force behind a lot of the VLANs that we have to create, which is what I was talking about for last weekend. We had several VLANs we had to expand or create, and that was due to wireless changes, you know, for either a guest network or adding to a building zone. So, and Casey, what was C pitch again, the user?
Well, I actually didn't write it down. Maybe Melinda took notes, but the one thing that I will say here that I noticed in that response is that we've got, it looks like they're separating the VLAN numbers by kind of a sequence number there, and that's something Canren does. You've got 4,000 plus VLANs to work with, so what we do in a lot of situations is what he's done here. So each building will start with a set of numbers, like the 100s for building A, and then within the 100s, you can start sequentially and go 100, 101, 102, or you might say VoIP is going to always be 110 in every build, 110 or 210 or 310, depending on the building. I would say it's a good idea to try to come up with a numbering scheme that's not so rigid that it's going to break over time, but you know, is ordered enough. You know, buildings are something that don't change very often. So if you start with buildings being separated by the 100s, you can look at a VLAN in a switch and see in an instant and know, because it's a 100, that's going to this building. And if you can also break it down one more level and do 110 is always voice, or, you know, the second digit, if that's 10, then you know that's always VoIP no matter the building. Some of those things I recommend doing. Just try not to get so rigid and define it down to the third or fourth digit, because if you get that fine grained, you really lock yourself in to schemes that you maybe can't follow in the long run.
Right. I've heard it, you know, there's so many exceptions that the exceptions become the same.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Casey, it's Clark at Mays.
Thank you very much, Melinda. I apologize, Clark. I wasn't taking notes as we did our introductions.
So Clark says, those are our VLAN names. We OSPF at each building, so we know that 100 is always wireless staff at every building. Then we defined our subnets to know what building they are at what and when we see it. So yeah, and I've seen this as an example as well. Third octet though, Casey, 1010 110X, for example. Is that something you've encountered?
Yeah, going to extending the same concept to your IP numbering schemes. Same type of thing applies. If you can, we always try to. It's harder for us to do that with our IP allocations in many cases, because we're allocating those out to members, and once we do that, we the smaller groups we don't deal with. But within our own backbone, the IP numbering we do within our own backbone, we do try to follow a structure and schemes that make them as recognizable as possible. And so when I was working in the LAN space, when I was at USD 250 and FSCC, I would definitely try to break up my IP blocks into sections that made sense either geographically or by building. Again, as generously as I could. By that I mean rules as generous as possible so that I didn't lock myself in so tight that, like you said, the exceptions became the rule.
Right. So, I mean, with NAT being everywhere on these wireless controllers and every device being NAT within a NAT, you know, that it really, to me, almost adds some flexibility in what you could do, a lot more so than obviously using public IP space all the time being routed. But when you know, like something I looked into as well is like, how do server farms do allocation on this scale, you know, on their scale? Like when you have a whole bunch of servers sitting in a subnet, how do they go ahead and determine, you know, what's going to go where? And they ultimately do go with something that, you know, matches a numbering scheme to a VLAN with an IP match on one of the octets there. So definitely something that I wanted to consider in this discussion, but I don't really feel like we're having the discussion. So Casey, maybe we ought to open up anybody that wants to talk to maybe actually discuss some of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, is there anybody out there that's done something different than what we've discussed here, or has recently renumbered VLANs or renumbered IP space and had a plan that you wouldn't mind sharing? Okay. I'm not hearing any takers, and that's good. That means a lot of people came looking for advice and ideas. Don't be shy to speak up here, talk out. We will try to give breaks here for your input. You know, I think, Dallas, what we may want to do, because it appears we've got people here looking for input and ideas, is we're recording this session. We may take these email addresses from folks, and at the end of this, we'll take the notes we've already got in chat here. We'll also solicit some ideas offline in email, and then maybe compile a document of at least a couple of the ideas that came to the forefront.
Okay.
And in the next call, maybe we can take just one of these ideas and try to flush more out of it. And one idea at a time, work through what a standard might look like, if you can call it that.
Right. So another topic or another element of what I wanted to discuss too was equipment. So that's something that I kind of wanted to hit upon. What vendors and what kind of equipment kind of make up your topology right now? I'll go ahead and go into mine, and we'll go ahead and post in the chat too. So we've got a documentable way. Is that a word? A way to document some of this information, and then come back, as Casey said, to present that in a better fashion than I think we can probably accomplish here. So at our core, we've got mostly HP equipment still, the ProCurve stuff. Aruba they've rebranded a lot of their switches as Aruba. We also have an Aruba wireless controller. So as far as a standard for us, we've kind of just locked into that. We don't use hardly any Cisco equipment at all. We just had really good luck with HP early on, and we've kind of stuck with that and just kind of moved along and ticked everything up as we went. I think it's 8200 series, 8200 something ZL switch for our core router. A 5406 or 5412 ZL chassis is what we have in most of the switch closets, and that pretty much encompasses everything. There's a little model of switch I was showing here. It is a J something or other here. See if I can find it real quick. It's a JL258A. It's actually a 1 gig switch. See if I can zoom in on that a little bit. Yeah, that was kind of an example of it there. It's a 1 gig switch. It has the ability to do a 10 gig uplink, and then you could also stack another switch with the other port there, like with the twin-ax cable. My other thought here too. Let me go ahead and bring up my chat. Excuse me. See if we've got some equipment that other people are using. So Doug, also HP with Aruba. Kelly, HP 5412 and 5406s as well. Aruba 7110 from Dean. Now, Doug, I'm not familiar with the HP 4 Life. Would you have time to talk about what that is? HPE 4 Life.
I don't think that's a switch. I think that's a declaration.
Oh, gosh, yeah. Okay, what an idiot. I'm sorry. Yeah, HP 5412. So, Casey, I'm seeing a lot of HP equipment at the core already.
Yeah, my experience has been K-12s in Kansas really love HP switching. Higher ed tends to be, community colleges tend to be kind of either or, maybe a lot of HP, maybe some Cisco. And then when you get to big higher ed, it tends to be Cisco and or Juniper. So, I mean, that's kind of a generalization, but it looks here like that's what I thought was true at least 6 years ago is still largely the case.
Austin, that's Austin Dinger has Brocade switches and Ruckus APs. I know Brocade is a very good quality, a good brand, a really good brand that I've encountered occasionally, not in our structure at all.
Yeah, I forgot about Brocade. There is a fair amount of Brocade floating around there in higher ed and a little bit in K-12, but they're also a fairly large player in higher ed.
And Ruckus, yeah, I've heard of Ruckus quite a bit. So, Dean, you also had some Cisco switching. So the 2960 stack series, yeah, or stacks. That's nice. They're probably 24 port, I would imagine. Does that sound about right, Casey?
Yeah, I think
48 maybe.
48.
Yeah, PoE plus. So 48 port PoE plus. That's handy, and I'll tell you where that really comes in handy. I think having the stacked switches is when you have, unlike the example I showed here, with all these patch panels above and one big switch underneath. I assume in the case where you got 48 ports per switch, you put a 48 port patch panel right above that, and then you have a lot shorter jumper cables that go from patch panel to switch, and then you jump patch panel to switch, and then of course candidate and stacking ports all along. So that's a little bit different structure, even when you bring all your switches together at a centralized point, that we, for whatever reason, started going this route, mainly because we bought those bigger switches and then we put all the patch panels at the top. One point of failure, though, you're stacking modules here inside of a chassis instead of stacking switches. And there's only about four power supplies in that switch to go out. So when you lose a couple of power supplies in there, you lose a pretty big switch.
You know, we don't have to explore this now, but something I see Doug mentioned there, Doug McDowell, was consortium pricing on purchasing like equipment. And we don't have to tackle that now, but we might jot that down as an idea of something to talk about in a future session. Is how do you guys all purchase, and are there consortium contracts like the Midwest Higher Education Consortium, and I know there are others. We might want to share contracts that we buy from that may be available to folks that they're not aware of. So we'll just put a pin in that and come back to it. Thank you, Doug.
Okay, so there's a question for me from Dustin. Were you going to try and take fiber to each classroom, then little switches in the classroom? Seems like a cool idea. Kind of. Okay, so thank you for asking that, Dustin, because I don't know, we talked a little bit in email before. Fiber to the classroom is something that I think we all know is probably on the horizon. My concern with that really centers around PoE, PoE Plus, really, let's just face it. It's going to have to be PoE Plus to a classroom, okay? So correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think PoE travels over fiber optic cable. So you're going to have to somehow take fiber to the classroom, but then transceive it to copper once again at the classroom or the learning space. So that's why I was focused on this little tiny switch, just to try this out, because what we're already seeing in a lot of cases with this centralized switch concept is we need a lot of power in those isolated switch closets. And with a lot of power consumption, a lot of cooling. So all of our switch closets have almost turned into little data center rooms with mini air conditioners, at least 30 amp twist locks, if not considering something bigger than your standard 110 single gang outlet or dual gang outlet. That kind of power is just not sufficient to power the 1,500, 3,000 watt power supplies that we're starting to pile up in these switch closets. So why are we trying to put all that equipment into one room when the building's already wired 110 and all of these power outlets go to their own breakers? Really the only thing missing in a classroom besides a switch right now is a battery backup. And so if we combine the battery backup to condition power and provide more consistent power on 110 in the classroom, and the ability of port density PoE Plus in the classroom, we can hang an access point off of that. We can power PoE Plus access points, cameras, all kinds of stuff right there at the classroom. And then, yes, Dustin, we don't have to worry about, you know, the limitations of putting a fiber optic cable to a classroom, because yeah, obviously we have to put power there. But my thought is I'm not going to have enough capability, money, resources to always put fiber to every classroom. And I mean, we can start that way, but we all know how it ends when you add another wing or you add something else. It's like, yeah, that's planned, but we can't get the fiber in today. We just need to get these rooms online. So say in a case of a renovation, you've already got existing copper. So that was one of my thoughts too. As long as it's less than 90 meters, keeping your centralized switch closet and reserving it for these cards, like I show up on the right-hand side, or large switches that basically just provide 10 gig connectivity to a classroom, which we're going to have to go to anyway, one way or another, through SFP+. Either you take a transceiver that looks like the fiber optic multi-mode transceiver on the one right-hand side, which is much more expensive and requires the fiber infrastructure to every classroom, or we leverage, for now, build the essentially 10 gig connectivity out to that classroom by investing in the switch and providing that SFP+ capability, and a small, inexpensive transceiver that is 10 gig that uses copper to push that 10 gig to that smaller switch, takes the 10 gig Ethernet SFP+ transceiver, so that we're basically pushing 10 gig over copper for a little while. It's kind of like breathing room to get to that point to where we're putting fiber in the classroom, and actually not have to change out a whole lot of things to have that infrastructure in place. So that's kind of where I'm thinking I'm going with it. I want to extend 10 gig to the classroom, but I don't really necessarily know that I'll ever have the funding to put fiber to every classroom, every office in our district. So, so Doug has a question here. Has anyone looked at moving towards 40 gig Ethernet or 100 gig Ethernet in the data center? As far as Pittsburgh's concerned, we have not. I could see that maybe utilized in our SAN environment with virtualized servers. Obviously, at some point, our building links will have to get to that phase as well. And that's a really great point, Doug, too, because when you start bringing all these 10 gig connections together, we need a backbone to actually support that. And that was another point I wanted to hit on when it came to the wireless, which if we put a wireless AP in any of these switches, you're going to have a backbone to that AP as well as PoE+. So fiber's great, but then, like I said, you had that problem with powering the AP in the classroom. So naturally, you're going to have to go to somehow powering that AP in the classroom. If we go copper to that classroom, from the module to the transceiver that's copper to the switch that's copper, we can maintain that 10 gig connectivity backbone to that little switch. Now, Doug, if we want to expand to a 40 gig to any of our switches or anything, I mean, that would technically be on the in the switch closet or the data center. You know, I mean, that's not going to affect the classroom very much, only from the standpoint that that uplink needs to be larger, I guess, was my thought on that.
So for those of you, thank you, Dallas. For those of you, because you brought up something here that I meant to talk about at some point during this. Those of you thinking about doing the 10 gig over copper out from a core switch out to the classroom, I'll caution you to remember, if you're thinking about doing that on your existing plant, research first. Make sure you know what kind of cabling you have between that core and that classroom, because if you want to get anywhere close to the 300 feet theoretical limit, you're going to need to have Cat 6A cable, not the slightly older Cat 6. You'll probably be able to do 10 gigs at something less than 300 feet over Cat 6, but I don't expect you'll get very far at all trying to do it over Cat 5 cable. So if you're doing it over a very long distance and you're planning on doing it with your existing copper, be sure to know what you've got there, because 10 gig isn't going to travel very far over older cabling.
Right. That's a great point, Casey. And that's one of the things I wanted to look at on this too, because a lot of our computer labs and other high density locations have a lot of proximity to these switch closets. That's just, it naturally happened that way, because I think, at least historically for our building, if you were the library, you had to be close to where a switch closet was, or a switch closet was planned to be close to where the library was, or the computer lab. So in a lot of our cases, if we wanted to actually extend 10 gig to a client in a computer lab, there's a good chance we're already pretty close to a core switch. So it could be done directly through each link that's already wired, or in the case of needing more capacity in a computer lab, which is always the case for wired clients in this case, we always seem to plan for on the plan 26 drops or something, and then all of a sudden it turns into 30 drops. Well, this is where I'm saying, if we can at least get one of those cables dedicated to a 10 gig link, we can throw in a little switch and be able to provide that kind of connectivity right there in the classroom and still provide 10 gig, even leveraging that copper. Casey, would you think that that is kind of a workaround scenario, maybe, if we wanted to accomplish that?
Yeah, I'm sorry, we've got some outages going on, and I was reading another message, so I heard part of that, but not all of it. Repeat the question for me.
Well, basically, you know, if we're short distance to a switch,
yeah,
where, you know, computer labs and libraries are anyway, we could possibly use and utilize that short distance copper and just drop switches into one of those computer labs or libraries in that case.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're doing it on your existing plant, the thing to keep in mind, cable plant, the thing to keep in mind is, what I would do is make sure you've got managed switches at both ends of it. And after you put this in place on that existing copper cabling, just watch your interface counters for a couple of days, a week, even, you know, check in on it for the first couple of months. Look for interface errors or any other indication that it's not tolerating that cable very well. As long as you run clean for a month or two without any significant interface errors, that cable's going to be fine for you. If you end up with troubles, then you may need to start figuring out how to budget for fiber from that closet to that room.
Okay. Doug's got some input here on plans to do lag 10 gig Ethernet uplinks with failover SFP+. So that's an interesting concept too. So link aggregation, is that what the abbreviation's for? Okay. So that is a solution for aggregating 10 gig links to accomplish this 40 gig or 10 gig connectivity on an uplink. And I got a question from Doug as well. I'm just curious what the biggest classroom port density. Classrooms technically don't have a whole lot of port density in our structure. We've got, or would require a whole lot of port density. We've got, like I kind of showed on the example, this would cover it for most classrooms. That is an AP, so it needs a port. I mean, a lot of people just, you know, run them in the ceiling and they go back to the switch, and that's basically hub and spoke pattern. This style I was talking about is still hub and spoke from the switch that has the port density in the classroom, but actually your AP would hang off of this switch right here. So I'd say a printer at least, a few clients, like 4 or 5 desktops maybe in a classroom, an IP phone for sure, like I said, 1 or 2 APs. So based upon that labeling, that would cover it for most classrooms. Now, not the same in computer labs, not the same in libraries or any of those higher port density areas.
So Dallas, I fear we're going to start losing people soon because we set this for an hour and we're getting pretty close to that. Before we do, something I wanted to touch on is clearly it sounds like we want to have more conversation about this, maybe even between the next time we do a video conference and now. I heard somebody mention earlier, I heard myself mention earlier, talking about this offline, getting suggestions from people and what they do. We're going to need a communication channel of some sort. Do you guys prefer something like an email list, or do you prefer something more interactive and a little modern like Slack or Discord? Feel free to speak up there in the chat, because Canron has the tools to establish a room or channel or whatever, but we'll want to know what kind of communication medium do you guys prefer? We can simply do the list. We can create something separate from tech reps. I know we've got some non-members here who won't even know what I mean when I say tech reps. So I want to make sure we get everybody captured. We'll send something out via email to those who participated here. Anything but Facebook. Yeah, I agree.
I agree as well.
Yeah. Yep. Dallas, I'll let you go ahead and wrap up, but please, you guys, put some suggestions there in the side channel, and we will send something out in email after this thing is over, letting you know how we can, how we're going to try to communicate offline.
Thanks, Casey. Yeah, I really appreciate everyone's time today for taking a look at some of these things with me, and the feedback that we have here in chat is great. I think I'm going to sit down with this and really find some commonality, find some common denominators here of what we all have going for us, and maybe restructure and ask the question again, a little more informed this time about a direction on how we're all trying to accomplish 10 gig connectivity in a classroom, or why we need to do it, and where the next jump and phase of our equipment and configuration lies. So I really, again, appreciate everyone's time, and I hope it was helpful for you to kind of look and see what's going on out there, and I look forward to talking with you all in the future.
Yeah, and Melinda just spoke up there in the chat. Like I said, I know we do have some non-members on here that not from Canron institutions. Please make sure that Melinda's got your email address if you want to be included in the mailing list or Discord or chat, whatever it ends up being. Aside from that, I thank you also. We love you guys having these kind of organic discussions, and I kind of hope that from this topics will pop up that don't necessarily deal with 10 gig connectivity, but are relevant to many of you, and we can take those to a separate group, or we'll just discuss them here after we tackle the topics at hand. I hope that hope this fosters some good communication. So I appreciate everybody's time. Melinda, did you have anything?
No, I think that's it, Casey. Like you said, I just wanted to make sure that if folks didn't receive an invite directly from Canron or from me, and they want to stay involved, to get a hold of us. at info@canrun.net, I think may be the best way, or reach out through my email address directly if that's what you have. But just want to make sure we include folks as much as we can. So
All right.
thanks for doing this, Dallas.
Well, thank you. Thank you for hosting it.
All right. Thank you, everyone. You'll hear from us soon.